All right, welcome everyone. We're just going to give it a minute or so for people to check in. I want to welcome you to our Water UCI colloquium. We'll get started in just a few moments. All right, I think we'll get started. Well, I want to welcome everyone to our colloquium on the storm before the calm. Stormwater capture as a means of addressing racism and environmental injustice in Los Angeles. I'm David Feldman. I'm the director of Water UCI, and it's a great privilege to welcome our colloquium speaker for this afternoon, Megan Kung, an economist with the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. Subject of calm before the storm, or storm before the calm, is that America's legacy of racist land use and housing policies affect how much impervious surface is in one's neighborhood. This not only affects the amounts of stormwater runoff generated, but also the levels of greenery, temperature, and flooding. Megan's research empirically examines the effect of race on neighborhood impervious surfaces in LA County. Her results imply that LA County follows national patterns of environmental racism, but that there's also great potential to help address historically racist planning policies while meeting stormwater goals through the thoughtful placement of green infrastructure. And before Megan begins, let me introduce her and tell you a little bit about her really splendid background. She is the economist at the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board and has been a member of the State Water Resources Control Board Racial Equity Team. She incorporates racial equity considerations and cost-benefit assessments of regulations, including the MS4 permit, total maximum daily loads, and agricultural waste discharge requirements. Her research interests include environmental justice, green infrastructure, stormwater, and the valuation of environmental benefits. She's been at the LA Regional Water Board since 2020. Prior to that, she was an economic specialist at ICF and a research fellow at US EPA's National Center for Environmental Economics. She holds a master's degree in international environmental policy from the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UC San Diego, and a bachelor's degree in journalism from San Jose State University. I want to welcome you, Megan, and it's all yours. After your remarks, we will open it up for what we hope will be a very robust Q&A. All yours.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Shannon, for having me. I'm excited to present my research to everyone today. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay. You guys see?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Okay. So the title of my research, it's called, as David mentioned, Storm Before the Calm. Stormwater capture as a means of addressing racism and environmental injustice in LA. Our presentation is going to be maybe 20 to 25 minutes, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So my study has two objectives. The first is to empirically show how race affects neighborhood impervious surface levels. So impervious surface, it's like what it sounds like. They're surfaces that can't absorb any water, so like asphalt and concrete, which there's a lot of in LA County. And the second study objective is to show that green infrastructure can help address racial inequities while also contributing to meeting stormwater goals. So let's start off with some history. LA County was once lush with forests and marshlands that supported multiple indigenous populations. California was a dense place even for back then. When the Spanish began colonizing California, there were at least 310,000 indigenous people organized into about 500 political units, and it was one of the most linguistically diverse places in the world. Despite the Spanish enslaving and murdering indigenous people in the mission system and government-sponsored militias hunting them down in the 1800s, they resisted, and as a result, their descendants survive today. However, the landscape and the populations here underwent massive transformations. By the early 20th century, LA was where people from other parts of the US and around the world came in search of opportunity. But opportunities weren't available equally for all. In 1902, the first racial housing covenant was filed in LA, which kept non-white people from purchasing property. The LA Realty Board then campaigned to put racial housing covenants on as many new developments as possible. Here's an example of restrictive language from the home deed of California State Assembly member, a former California State Assembly member and former Southgate Mayor, Hector de la Torre. It says, until January 1st, 1989, no lot in said tract shall at any time be lived upon by a person whose blood is not entirely that of the Caucasian race. And then it goes on to specify, who does not count as the Caucasian race. And it makes an exception to allow anyone who's non-white to live there as long as they're a servant of the white occupant. So anyway, probably a lot of us in this audience have seen maps like this before. This is a 1932 map of LA from the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And they rated the desirability of neighborhoods, which banks use for making decisions on who to give home loans to. And you can see here, there's 4 colors. Green indicates neighborhoods that were most desirable. Blue neighborhoods were desirable, but less so. Yellow was undesirable, and red was the least desirable. And these ratings were largely based on the racial composition of these neighborhoods. So the green neighborhoods, like here in Beverly Hills, very white, homogenously white and wealthy. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, the red neighborhoods were very racially mixed. And this is where the term redlining comes from. This system effectively blocked off whole communities from creating intergenerational wealth. This is a major reason why, even though the Fair Housing Act banned redlining in 1968, we still feel the effects today, and wealth is still disproportionately concentrated among white people in America and in LA. In LA today, compared to median white household wealth, Black and Mexican households hold 1%, Koreans hold 7%, Latinos hold 12%, and Vietnamese hold 17%. And this is from a great report by UCLA called The Color of Wealth in Los Angeles. But also, redlining has still been happening today, even though it's officially banned. For example, in January, City National Bank, which is based in LA, was required to pay $31 million to the Department of Justice for avoiding underwriting mortgages in Black and Latino neighborhoods. So anyway, back to history. Meanwhile, as LA County grew, more and more roads were paved to accommodate automobiles and development. Also, in order to tame the flood-prone LA River, the US Army Corps of Engineers began paving over the river in the 1930s, transforming it into a concrete-lined channel to move stormwater quickly out to the ocean. So you can see here in the upper right, here's a picture of the LA River in the 1930s. And on the lower right is a picture of the LA River today. So growing swaths of asphalt and concrete went hand in hand with the growth of LA. However, as with other cities across the US, the distribution of impervious surfaces also happened unevenly, with richer, wider neighborhoods able to have more parks and trees, and therefore less impervious surfaces. I have a story map of my research, which I'll link to at the end, but that story map has links to peer-reviewed articles about this topic. Also, a major reason for why LA looks the way it does today is because it created the nation's first zoning code in 1904. This kept industrial activities out of the largely white West Side and put them in the southern and eastern parts of LA. And public investment in parks and green space flowed more to wider, more affluent neighborhoods. One of the consequences of impervious surfaces is that while they allow for urban development, they also cause polluted runoff. So when it rains, all that gunk on the street and on rooftops, it gets washed, through the storm drains and out into the LA River and directly out to the ocean. Here's a picture of the LA River during a storm event, which is what it's been looking like a lot lately. Every rain event is a missed opportunity to capture stormwater and replenish groundwater aquifers, which are important sources of local water, which is really important in California, where we have a lot of droughts. Large areas of impervious surfaces also lead to urban heat island effects, as the asphalt and concrete get hotter and retain more heat than natural surfaces. Here you can see how the west side is cooler, and as you move east, gets warmer. Also, the swaths of blue you see are like vegetated areas, that are parks and mountains. For example, here are the Santa Monica Mountains, there's Griffith Park, here's Whittier Narrows, and it's pretty interesting. Also, you can see, the lines of the streets that are significantly warmer than other parts. Recently, there's been quite a bit of press about inequities in urban tree canopy and urban heat. On top is a story by the LA Times on how neighborhoods that are poorer and with more people of color bear the brunt of extreme heat. On the bottom is an example from National Geographic showing how tree canopy decreases driving down Vermont Avenue in LA from north to south. Again, my story map has more links to articles on this topic. Green stormwater infrastructure can act like sponges that soak up or filter stormwater. This not only helps with reducing runoff, but also provide other benefits, such as reducing urban heat, improving air quality, increasing wildlife habitat, improving neighborhood aesthetics, and increasing recreational opportunities in the form of parks when installed thoughtfully. So on the left here, it's a diagram, an example of a stormwater tree. So in this example, there's some pervious pavement, so stormwater can filter through that and go down, and the tree roots can suck up the water that's stored down here. And here on the right is a diagram of a rain garden, and similar concept. Water can soak through the soil here, and where appropriate, it can infiltrate into the ground and through to the groundwater aquifers. Or if that's not appropriate, then it can also be just drained through a pipe. And at least by the time it goes out into the pipe and into the LA River, it's at least been filtered through this soil here. Here's an example of a photograph of a bioswale. You might see this on the street. I get very excited when I see this, so maybe you guys can spot these now and also get excited. So you can see there are these cutouts in the curbs to allow water to flow through, and it soaks into the ground here, which I think is really cool. Okay, so as for the data that I collected for my study, the impervious surface data I got from the USGS National Land Cover Database. And that data was collected from 2016. This is a raster data set, which means it was essentially a collection of pixels that were derived from satellite imagery, and each pixel has a value assigned to it in terms of how impervious that land area is. So I averaged these pixel values over census tracts and created this map. So the green on this map are areas that are more green, and red shows the areas that are most impervious. So it goes from green to yellow to orange to red. The gray that you see are the census tracts that I omitted because they have very few people living there. So I omitted census tracts that were in the first percentile population and population density. So that got rid of the Angeles National Forest here, got rid of Griffith Park, LAX, you know, etc. For sociodemographic data, I got this data from the US Census American Community Survey in 2018. At the time I put together this data set, that was the most recent available. The variables I collected were race, median income, owner-occupied percentage, and population, from which I created a population density variable. And for land use, I got this data from the Southern California Association of Governments from 2016. From this data, I calculated numbers by census tract, the percent single family homes, percent multifamily homes, percent commercial, percent industrial, and percent agricultural. There's not a ton of agricultural land in LA County, but there's some. And the sample size of my data set was about 2,200 census tracts. Okay, so for the methodology I used for my analysis, the first was a quintile analysis. This shows the average impervious surface values by quintiles of race. What is a quintile? So, you know, if we have a population that can be divided into 100 percentiles, and if we divide that 100 by 5 groups, you know, hence the word quintiles. Yeah, so those 5 groups are called quintiles. So the first quintile would be the 1st to the 20th percentile. The second quintile would be 21st to the 40th, and so on. And the second method that I used for my analysis was spatial regressions. These were analysis of how much race affects impervious surface while controlling for other variables and effects from neighboring census tracts. So I control for all the variables I listed earlier from the census and land use. These effects from neighboring census tracts are like, I guess they're called neighbor effects. These spatial regressions are often used in social science research because where people were affected by people nearby, I might see a neighbor put in a rain garden, or the opposite, I might see them pave over vegetation, and I think that's really cool. So I do that too. So spatial regressions help control for neighbor effects like these. So what do impervious surface values actually look like? The minimum value in my data set was 0.19. And here's what that census tract looks like. It's not green, but it's brown. It might be green now with all the rings, but as you can see, there's not very much development, a lot of natural surfaces. The mean value in my data set was 58. I think this is somewhere in Burbank. You can see lots of rooftops and streets, but you can also see some trees lining those streets. And the maximum impervious surface value in my data set was 95. This is somewhere downtown, I think, and you know, lots of industrial land use here, and no greenery at all. Okay, so I'll show you the results of my quintile analysis. First, here's the results for white population. So yeah, as I mentioned before, you know, the first quintile represents the 1st to the 20th percentile population, white population, and the average impervious surface values for the first quintile is about 70. And as you move up in quintile, or in other words, as the white population increases, you see the impervious surface values decrease. For the Black population, you see the opposite, especially in the 4th and 5th quintiles. As the Black population increases, impervious surface values increase. For Hispanic population, it's similar. As the Hispanic population increases, so does impervious surface. And for the Asian population, results are mixed. Impervious surface values decrease from about the 1st to the 3rd quintile, but then increase again through the 4th and 5th quintile. But yeah, overall, the picture for people of color is different than that of white people. So yeah, moving on, race is unfortunately correlated with other factors like income, owner-occupied rates, population density, and land use. And these all affect impervious surface levels. So how much is neighborhood impervious surface explained by race? Well, we control for these other factors. Next, I'll move on to spatial regressions to control for these factors plus neighbor effects. Okay, so before I show you my results, let me set up the graph for you. So the y-axis in red, these values indicate the difference in imperviousness from the first quintile. And the x-axis in red shows the quintiles relative to the first quintile. So yeah, the first, you only see values 2 to 5. The first quintile is left out because the values that I'm showing show the difference between all these other quintiles and the first. Okay, so in model 1, that's the most simple model where I only look at how race affects impervious surface, controlling for nothing else. These are the results for white quintiles, and it's very similar to the earlier results I showed. As the white population increases, impervious surface values decrease. For Black population, it's the opposite. As their population increases, so does impervious surface. The same for Hispanic. And for Asian, results are statistically insignificant. I forgot to mention these lines. They signify 95% confidence intervals, which means that there's a 95% probability that values fall within those bars. So for Asian, since we see that the bars intersect the 0 line, that means it's statistically insignificant. So yeah, moving on to model 2, I put in my first control variable, which is median income. So let me go back to model 1. So you can see the difference. Here's model 1, and here's model 2. So you can see that for Hispanic, that becomes statistically insignificant, but results look pretty similar for white and Black. For model 3, I add in another control variable, which is owner-occupied rate. And now for people of color, it becomes statistically insignificant. But for white, we still see a statistically significant and decreasing trend for impervious surface values. For model 4, I throw in population density, and the results look very similar to the previous results. And moving on to model 5, which has the most control variables, has all those land use variables, single family home percentage, multifamily homes, industrial, commercial, and agricultural. Again, the results look pretty similar. We still see a negative decreasing trend for impervious surface values as the white population increases. So yeah, what are the takeaways from these results? In general, neighborhoods with more white residents have less impervious surfaces, while neighborhoods with more people of color have more impervious surfaces. Heavily Black and Hispanic neighborhoods have the most impervious surfaces. After controlling for other factors that affect neighborhood impervious surface levels, the percentage of white residents is still a significant predictor. So the implication is that green stormwater infrastructure efforts should be targeted to neighborhoods with more people of color for both moral and practical reasons. This helps correct for racial inequities while also capturing stormwater where there is most opportunity. Or another way to look at it, I think, is if you put green infrastructure in the most impervious areas, most likely this would be contributing towards racial equity. And in terms of the current status of what's been going on, there is a really great report that came out by LA Waterkeeper last month about the progress of the Safe Clean Water Program in LA. The Safe Clean Water Program, they manage the regional stormwater projects that happen in the county. And this report found that a lot of projects have been cited in or near disadvantaged communities, which is good. But unfortunately, only 30 acres will be removed and greened out of 2.6 million acres in LA County. So obviously, there's still a lot of progress that can be made. So yeah, let me open up to questions and comments. But I also want to mention Here's the link to the story map that I made, which is almost exactly the same content as what I just presented. Oh, but I also want to caveat that it works best on desktops, also works on Androids, but doesn't work on some iPhones. Oh, also I realized the results of my study, probably, I mean, it can make you sad or mad or both. And the story map has suggestions on, what the public can do, suggestions for like nonprofits to look at, and just other actions to get involved. And yeah, that's my contact information for anyone who wants to reach out directly. I'm happy to talk. So yeah, let me open up to questions and comments.
Great presentation, Megan. Thank you very, very much. For all of the participants, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A box. Please insert your question. We'll go through them and make sure that as many of them as we can answer within the remaining hour will be answered. And I'm happy to say we have a couple questions already. One from Michael Mendez. Thank you for your great analysis. How do you intend to use these findings in the regulatory work of the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I guess first is the obvious, which is to continue sharing this information. Green stormwater infrastructure can be incorporated into so many things. So I think, the more agencies that I guess see this research and just kind of keep it in the back of their minds and just think of green infrastructure as like a guiding principle in their work. I think that would be really helpful because it can be incorporated into like streets, transportation or schools, things like that. Something else, I've also been thinking about green infrastructure in the context of the permits I've been working on. Like I've been working on the CII permit, which will require commercial, industrial, and institutional properties over 5 acres in these 2 watersheds in LA County to implement stormwater BMPs. And I think, a good chunk of these 2 watersheds are disadvantaged communities, which I think it's great to have more green infrastructure installed in these areas. And I guess another thing, it's very early stages, but there is interest at the LA Regional Water Board and at the State Board to develop stormwater credit trading programs. There aren't a ton of these programs across the country, but DC has implemented theirs really successfully. And it's managed to get money from, developers in sort of the central, more wealthier part of town going to, other parts of town that need more greenery and need more stormwater capture. So we can get something like that here. That would be awesome.
Great. We have a similar question from Chloe Selby, but it's a question I think that you could maybe even broaden, and that is, how do you apply your findings to enact change more generally?
Great question. I would also like to throw that question back at everyone else, because I know I don't have all of the answers. But some suggestions that like I put in the story map are like, just think about what you're interested in. Maybe you have kids in public schools and the schoolyards aren't really yards. They're just huge areas of asphalt. Maybe you can get involved with the LA Living Schoolyards Coalition and advocate for greening schools, or participating in planning department hearings, just throwing out your voice saying you want more, trees or more bioswales on new developments. So things like that.
Very good. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. Can you speak to the value differences between GI and NBS in terms of benefits? GI as implemented to date doesn't often result in actual impervious surface reductions, is being claimed.
Oh, actually, can you clarify the question? GI and NBS? I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, we'll give the anonymous attendee an opportunity in the chat to spell out those acronyms in more detail. While we do that, let me go on to another question. Another anonymous attendee. How has gentrification worsened or alleviated these findings for Black, Indigenous, and people of color? Or how more generally has it impacted them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't look at gentrification as part of the study, but that could definitely be a future area of research. I mean, gentrification isn't great, but yeah, I don't know. There's that's an open question. A lot of so new developments are required to install low impact development infrastructure. So I guess, yeah, green infrastructure on their properties. So I mean, that's great for stormwater capture, but there's all these other externalities that come with having a luxury development in a lower income neighborhood, which isn't great. And there's just all these other factors that are just outside of the scope of the water boards. But then that just highlights the need of how we need to work with other agencies and think about things like rent control or workforce development, hiring workforce nearby. So yeah, I don't know, that can be a really, really long discussion.
Great. Lauren Poor has a question. First of all, she says, amazing research. Thank you. How can this be paired with protective legislation to ensure that once the neighborhoods become more green or have less imperviousness, the tenants and occupants can stay there, avoiding gentrification in newly greened areas? So kind of related to the previous question, but a little different wrinkle.
Yeah, I guess just like what I said before, it highlights the need for us to just work with different agencies, different community groups to think about things like rent control and hiring a local workforce, and just hearing more from the community. Because yeah, I certainly don't have all the answers for that.
So it sounds like clearly one of the implications of your work, Megan, is that stormwater capture and impervious surface issues, greening of neighborhoods, really needs to be part of a more broadly comprehensive plan for environmental justice in communities.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, very, very good. James Cortez Rivera says, this presentation is amazing. I understand why your data omitted forested areas. Can you explain why you removed Wilmington, the southern tip of Los Angeles City? While it is low density, it has some of the most marginalized populations in the county, and it is also an area that is heavily red in the heat map.
Yeah, I can that's definitely something I can look at again. I just chose the first percentile population density because just I'm looking at how this affects people. So I didn't want to include areas that didn't have that many people. But it does, I don't know, yeah, it seems like it's worth looking into this area in Wilmington. Maybe I should have kept it in the study. So that's a great suggestion to look into.
And then Chloe Selby has a question. Was the data for this analysis accessible? I suppose you could also put it in the present tense. Is the data for this analysis accessible? Or are there any obstacles to be aware of for this type of research?
So yeah, all the data that I used for this analysis is publicly accessible. You can Google search them all and find them. In terms of the data set I put together, it's very messy. It's not publicly available yet. But in terms of the source data, that's all publicly accessible. In terms of obstacles, just the typical obstacles that come up with data cleaning. Because this data was publicly accessible, there actually weren't really a ton of obstacles.
Very good. A couple of participants had some comments, and I think they'd be certainly worth to get your reaction to, Megan. One attendee to the colloquium noted that the net impervious surface added by Measure W was approximately 3 acres. The gross was 30 acres. Do you have any thoughts on that, or perhaps on Measure W and its implications for your research more generally?
Well, yeah, that's definitely an issue. I think moving forward, you know, the water board can, I guess, kind of work with Measure W some more and kind of thinking about incorporating green infrastructure and having that as more of a guiding principle. Yeah.
Very good. So something that, as Measure W continues to be implemented, decision makers need to really prioritize, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there was another report. Actually, no. I think, yeah, there's been so many reports that have more specific recommendations than what I do. For example, the LA Waterkeeper report that I mentioned that came out in January. There's also another report called was it Equity Stormwater? You know what? Reach out to me and I can think of some.
Great. We'll make sure that people see your email contact and that you would definitely entertain questions in the future. Thank you for that. Maura Alera has a very interesting methodological question. What role might topography, high ground versus low ground, play in disparities in stormwater impacts? And how might this influence the results of the study and its policy implications?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't look into topography for this study. That could be something else to look at in the future. I mean, my guess is that, you know, probably a wider, wealthier communities, you know, probably didn't live in more low-lying areas because they were more subject to flooding. But, you know, that's a hypothesis, something to look into. But my guess is, you know, that probably affects how things are today.
Very good. We have, I think we can get a clarification on one of the earlier questions on NBS nature-based solutions. So let me go back to the question, the original question. So the question was, can you speak to the value difference between GI and nature-based solutions in terms of benefits? GI, which I guess would be the opposite of nature-based solutions for stormwater management, as implemented to date, doesn't often result in actual impervious surface reductions.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something that we should think about. We should have more nature-based solutions. Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to say to that. I mean, yeah, I agree.
Are there any particular impediments? Is it a lack of knowledge about their effectiveness, or just a lack of willingness to invest in them, do you think? Any thoughts on this in your work generally, Megan?
You know, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, certainly something that we all need to be thinking about and studying. And please continue. If you have additional questions, just put them into the Q&A and we'll get them answered. Carol Moore has an observation, and I'd like to get your reaction. I think it's an interesting observation. She says, I've observed this issue. I noticed the lack of trees while driving in Los Angeles. When I looked at what had happened, I noticed the streets had been widened. Property owners had paved their yards to park their vehicles and their recreational vehicles. Continue to be troubled for not only have we lost wetlands as well as pervious areas, we continue to push for even higher density in low-income areas, as the Southern California Association of Governments supports that for transportation usage. She ends by saying, removing pavement is a must for flood control. We cannot continue to pave. A lot of interesting observations embedded in these comments. Any reactions or thoughts to this? Kind of a lot of thought here being given to the role of transportation infrastructure and how it may adversely affect this issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, historically, public transportation decisions have also been based on like race and income. I think higher income neighborhoods or wider, or wider neighborhoods traditionally, or sometimes don't want public transportation coming to their neighborhoods, and same with high density housing. So yes, we do need more high density housing, and it is happening. For example, like in my neighborhood in Koreatown, there's a ton of more apartments going up. And while I do agree that we need more housing, I feel like new denser housing is the distribution of it is not really equal. Like we should be spreading it out to other areas as well, not just my neighborhood. Not that I don't want more housing, but
Right.
It could be more equitably distributed.
Well, that's a very important point you make, and it's certainly one that we see in a lot of conversations about affordable housing in Los Angeles generally for a variety of reasons. Thomas Pashota has a great question, methodological question. Can you describe how the populations were grouped into the quintiles, lowest and highest? Is this based on population density, income, or other factors?
So the quintiles were based on the racial values. So yeah, I decided to use quintiles because the racial distributions are not all the same. And by putting it into quintiles, this makes it more consistent. So yeah, dividing into, you take 100 percentiles and you divide that into 5 groups, so that each group has the same number of census tracts. So yeah, so the first quintile would have the 1st to the 20th percentile, and then second quintile would have 21st to the 40th, and then so on and so on. I hope that was clear.
Okay, very good. While we wait for some other questions, I had a couple of questions on my own, Megan. I want to start out with some of the implications of your study for land use policy in cities more generally. Clearly, this is a national problem, and we would expect that many of the problems that you've identified in Los Angeles, in terms of racial disparities and pervious surface, would exist in other cities as well. Do you have any thoughts about what sorts of specific policies states more generally, and perhaps even the Environmental Protection Agency or other federal agencies, Housing and Urban Development, for example, Department of Transportation? Is there a need for some national and state level policies in this area to really push this question of injustice, really overcoming this question of racial injustice and stormwater?
Yeah, it'd be awesome if there was more coordination on this. Like I said, green infrastructure can be incorporated in like all the agencies you just mentioned, housing, transportation. I think I do know a while back, EPA was working on some MS4 stormwater rule, but I think that fell through. I don't have any more specifics about that. But yeah, I think national coordination would be hard to do, but it doesn't mean it's not worth trying.
Mhm.
Same with, at the state level and the local level. At least local level, we have more control. And yeah, I'll just keep sharing this information, and hopefully people will work together on this.
Second question is, this is great research. What do you see as the next set of research challenges in this area? And what do you see yourself as working on in this domain?
I don't know. Yeah. In terms of research challenges in the future, I don't know. I think I just want people to take this research and do something with it. I am open to suggestions on what else to look into. I don't know. But yeah, for now I'm focused on this, and also hoping to at least put this into a peer-reviewed journal. But that's a slow work in progress.
If anyone out there has any suggestions, please do forward those to Megan. I know she'd be delighted to hear of some prospective outlets. I had another question while we wait, if anyone else has additional questions to put in the Q&A. It's really interesting when we talk about racial disparities and stormwater harvesting and stormwater management. Would it be fair to assume also that these disparities with respect to impervious surface and greening and cooling would also be reflected, or perhaps not, but might also be reflected in things like increased local flood risks in communities of color? And is enough being done to think about ways of managing stormwater to alleviate that problem?
Yeah, definitely. This is definitely related to flood risk. I do know, like in South LA, like nuisance flooding happens even when there isn't a ton of rain. Just drainage is so poor there that you get like little floods. So yeah, there definitely needs to be more green infrastructure there. What was the second part to the question?
Yeah, basically, what can we do, or what should we be doing in terms of either nature-based solutions or other infrastructure solutions to deal with that problem, to manage that problem?
Yeah, I guess just look at the maps and think about local knowledge of these neighborhoods, and just think about like where should we put more green infrastructure and nature-based solutions to not only reduce urban heat, but also mitigate flood risk, mitigate even like the little floods, the nuisance floods. Yeah.
Very good. We have a few minutes remaining. If anyone has any additional questions or comments they'd like to share, please put them into the Q&A. Megan, you're working for the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board. I take it that this issue from your perspective is also something of concern at the state level with the State Water Quality Control Board? And if so, are there things that they're doing or considering that we need to know about?
Well, yeah, I brought up we're looking into stormwater credit trading, but I do know that they are thinking about how to incorporate green stormwater infrastructure, how to increase park space to deal with stormwater. I unfortunately can't speak to anything more specific. Right. I do know that they are thinking about it. Oh, actually, no, I thought of something. Yeah, there is, State Board is working on the MS4 phase 2 permit, so MS4 phase 1 affects how, cities capturing stormwater. MS4 phase 2 affects places like schools, and it will require them to capture stormwater. which I think would be great because, for example, in LA, the LA Unified School District is the largest landowner. So requiring them to capture stormwater and install nature-based solutions, that would have a huge impact.
Mhm.
This county.
Big footprint there.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions from our audience? I think we've got one. Let's see here. We had one more question. I guess that was it. Seeing no more questions, I'm going to ask Megan if you had any further observations that you'd like to share. Maybe what we could be doing to heighten awareness of this issue here in Orange County, as well as in LA County. It seems to be an issue that's certainly worthwhile. What do we need to be doing? What do we need to be enacting change?
Yeah, I guess just keep sharing this information, being aware of how, our racism in our history just affects like impervious surface and stormwater today, and just increasing collaboration and incorporating green infrastructure and nature-based solutions into everything. And I'll also turn the question back to you. What do you think you guys should be doing?
Well, a couple of suggestions, and we've got a couple, well, one specifically, you were asking about outlets for your great research and a way of disseminating it. James Cortez Rivera suggests case studies in the environment, which might be a good journal to target. I would second that, by the way, familiar with that journal, and it's a great journal, and it has definitely a policy-focused audience. So that's a good suggestion. Something else I would want to pick up on, yes, published by University of California Press, indeed. Thank you for that, James. You mentioned education. Maybe a final question, a final issue to reflect on. What can we be doing in terms of curriculum in public schools?
Yeah, I think absolutely stormwater should be incorporated into the curriculum, whatever environmental classes that happen. And even just, having a rain garden in the schoolyard, I think that would be really educational for kids. Just gets them thinking about it. And then when they're walking around, maybe they can think about like, where else can stormwater be captured? And then maybe they'll work at the water board or at other agencies.
Or maybe even having some of the students work on stormwater projects. Hands-on work.
Yeah,
great.
Definitely.
Great. Well, Megan, enormous thanks to you. Great presentation. Maybe we'll have you back in the future sometime to talk about other aspects of these issues and also your current research. Before we end our colloquium this afternoon, I want to mention that Water UCI's next colloquium will be on April 13th at noon. It's entitled Water Rights and Water Wrongs, Rethinking Equity in California. This will be an in-person colloquium, and it will feature a public reception with refreshments. We will get an email blast out to all of you who registered for this event today, and we will also post details on this next colloquium on our website as well. So again, Megan, thank you very much, and thank you to our participants today. And let's give it up for Megan Kung's presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you for all the questions.